I'm Serena Marsh, and at 37, I learned a house can be stolen while you're off guarding the country that prints the deeds. I spent 10 years saving for one thing: a seaside house for my parents, Walt and Joan, who'd been married 50 years and poor for most of them. I closed on it from a base overseas. I flew home to hand them the keys at their anniversary. But when I came up the gravel drive, my mother was crying on the porch. My father sat trembling on the steps with 2 suitcases between his feet. And a woman I'd married into pointed at my mom and screamed, "This is our house. Get out." 3 strange cars filled the yard. My husband's family had moved in while I was deployed. By the time I set my duffel down on the boards, I still hadn't seen what they'd done to the inside, or learned where the money was really going. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible family moments and answer them with a steady voice instead of a raised one. If you've ever been called too much for finally drawing a line, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My parents married in 1975 with $40 and a borrowed truck. My father fixed other men's tractors in a gravel lot outside Roseburg, Oregon. My mother polished other people's furniture for cash, and our whole childhood smelled like the lemon oil she rubbed into strangers' good tables. We never had a bad year and a good year. We had lean years and leaner ones. When I was 9, we drove to the coast once, and my mother stood at the rail and closed her eyes at the sound of the water. She said, "Wouldn't that be something, to fall asleep to that?" I never forgot it. I went to college on an ROTC scholarship because it was the only door that opened, and I kept it open. Logistics officer, then captain, then major. I learned to move fuel and food and people across a desert without losing my temper, and I saved like the war might end my paycheck any minute. 10 years, deployment pay, a small inheritance, every bonus. Last spring, I closed on a big weathered house on a bluff in Harlan Cove, Lincoln County. $425,000, deed in my name alone. It had a porch that faced the Pacific and a kitchen big enough for my mother to ruin with that lemon oil smell. I signed the papers from a folding desk 8,000 miles away. I'd never set foot inside the place I bought. The plan was simple, and I'd carried it for a year. Drive my parents up for their 50th, put the key in my mother's hand, and watch her close her eyes at the sound of the water. I should have known a plan that clean never survives contact. The last 2 months of the deployment, my connection home was thin. An hour of bandwidth, then nothing for days. My husband Kyle had offered to handle the house while I finished my tour. Get it cleaned, the porch sealed, ready for the party. It was the one helpful thing he'd offered in years, and I was grateful, and that should have been my first warning. The utility statements started climbing. Water, power, garbage, all of it. The way a house climbs when more people live in it than should. I asked Kyle about it on a scratchy call. He said ran the heat. I asked him to forward the account login so I could watch the bills myself. He said he'd get to it. He never did. My parents mentioned, lightly, that Kyle's people had been out at the coast a lot lately, helping. My mother is too kind to gossip, so when she says something twice, it means something. I wrote it down. I asked the base legal office, hypothetically, how I'd add my parents to the household records on a property I owned. I started the paperwork, but I was overseas, on a base I couldn't leave, closing a chapter I couldn't pause, and every lever I reached for needed a hand on the ground I didn't have. Kyle sent one photo to settle me, the living room all cleaned up. The angle was strange, tight on a single corner, cropped hard like a real estate listing trying to hide a water stain. I stared at it longer than a clean room deserves. What were they keeping out of the frame? Here's the thing my family kept forgetting about me. I don't panic. It's not a virtue. It's a tool I sharpened in rooms where panic got people hurt. When a convoy plan falls apart at 2 o'clock in the morning and 12 people look at you, you learn that the loudest person in the room is almost never the one in charge. My soldiers used to repeat a line I'd say when a briefing went sideways. Somebody would start spinning, and I'd sit down my coffee and say it flat. I'm calm. That should worry you. It always landed because calm for me meant I'd already moved past the feeling and into the plan. But calm has a cost, and mine had a name over responsibility. I was the one who fixed things, my family's things, Kyle's family's things, everyone's things. When a car died, when a lease went bad, when somebody's rent came up short, The call came to me, and I answered it every time for 20 years. So when Kyle's mother needed a place to land after her lease ended, and Kyle said, "Just for a little while," I'd said yes from across the ocean without thinking hard enough. I'd built a lifetime of teaching them that Serena absorbs whatever you hand her, that she carries it and doesn't complain. I thought that discipline was for the field. I thought the hard part of my life happened in places with no running water and people shooting at me. The hardest thing I'd ever do was waiting for me at home on a porch with a wind chime missing. I landed in Portland on a gray Thursday and rented a car at the counter still in my uniform. 2.5 hours to the coast. I drove it with the windows cracked, breathing out the recycled airplane air, rehearsing the moment in my head like a mission brief. Pull in, hug my parents, walk my mother to the porch, put the key in her hand, watch her close her eyes. I had the key in my breast pocket the whole flight, and I touched it at every red light. The road dropped through the spruce, and then the ocean opened up flat and silver on my left, and I almost cried right there because she was going to love it. She was finally going to have it. Then I made the last turn onto the gravel, and my foot came off the gas on its own. There were 3 cars I didn't know in the drive. A little folding sign staked into my mother's flower bed read, "Guest parking" in cheerful printed letters, and the porch railing where my father had hung a set of brass wind chimes. Chimes he'd bought with his own trembling hands to mark 50 years, was bare. I could see the empty hook. I sat in the rental with the engine ticking and listened. Somewhere inside the house I'd bought for my mother, strangers were laughing, not family laughter. The polite, unfamiliar laughter of people who'd paid to be there. I didn't know that yet, but the word on that sign, "Guest," had no business at my parents' front door, and my stomach already knew it. I came up the steps, and the first thing I saw was my mother, 72 years old in her good blue cardigan, crying with her hand pressed flat over her mouth the way she does when she's trying not to make noise about it. My father sat below her on the steps with 2 suitcases, their suitcases packed, and his hands were shaking worse than the Parkinson's makes them shake, which meant it wasn't the Parkinson's. Before I could speak, the screen door banged and Brenda came out. My mother-in-law, Kyle's mother, 62 in a sundress I didn't recognize, holding a wine glass at 11 o'clock in the morning, and she didn't see me yet. She saw my mother on the porch, and she crossed it in 3 steps and pointed at the driveway and said it loud enough for the 2 strangers standing by the rail to hear. "This is our house. Get out." My mother flinched, like she'd been slapped. My father started to stand and couldn't. And I want you to understand what 20 years of training does to a person, because every cell in my body wanted to put Brenda through the railing. And instead, I set my duffel down on the boards, slow, and I let the silence do the first part of the work. The 2 strangers looked at me. The uniform does that. Brenda half turned, irritated, expecting one more person to manage. Then she actually looked at my face, and the wine glass dipped in her hand, and she said, "Serena." Just my name, like a door clicking shut somewhere behind her. She didn't know yet whose name was on the paper that mattered. She didn't know the woman she'd just screamed at was my mother. She was about to have the longest afternoon of her life, and I was going to give it to her one quiet piece at a time. I stepped past Brenda and pushed the screen door open and walked into the house I'd bought and never seen. The silence I'd left on the porch followed me inside because Kyle was standing in the front room, and the second he saw me, his whole face came apart. The room had numbers on the doors, little brass stick-on numerals, 1 and 2 and 3, screwed into the bedroom doors down the hall like a motel. My mother's future kitchen, the big one I'd pictured her ruining with lemon oil, had a folding table set up by the window with a guest book, a basket of single-serve coffee pods, and a laminated stand that said, "Check in 3 p.m. The whole place smelled wrong, not like a home, like the chemical lemon of a rental cleaning service laid over bleach. The smell strangers leave, so the next strangers won't notice the last ones. My mother's lemon oil smells like care. This smelled like a cover-up. A younger man I half recognized as Kyle's brother, Dustin, came out of the hall carrying folded towels stacked on his forearm like a bellhop. Saw me, saw the uniform, and stopped so fast a towel slid off the top. Kyle found his voice, and it came out small. "Serena? Honey, you're early." I looked at the numbers on the doors. I looked at the check-in sign. I looked at my husband, holding nothing and explaining nothing. "You're running it like a hotel," I said. It wasn't a question. The look that passed between Kyle and Dustin answered the only question I had left, whether my husband was a bystander to this or a partner in it. I had my answer, I just didn't say so yet. Everyone braced for me to blow. That's the thing about people who yell. They only know how to defend against more yelling, so I didn't give them any. I turned around, walked back to the porch, and crouched down in front of my father. Dad, we're going to get a clean room with 2 beds and good pillows, and you're going to sleep tonight. He tried to apologize, and I wouldn't let him. I carried their suitcases to the rental myself, one in each hand, past Brenda, who'd gone quiet and was working out the math of the uniform and the name. I drove my parents 15 minutes up the highway to a little oceanfront motel, a real one with a license on the wall, and I got them a room facing the water, and I made my mother sit on the bed while I ran the heat. She kept saying she didn't understand. They'd come to move in like we planned. And Kyle's mother had told them there had been a change. I said, "There's been a change. Mine." That made her almost smile. I got them dinner. I waited until my father's hands went still in sleep. Then I sat in the motel's plastic chair under the buzzing lot light with a legal pad on my knee, and I did the only thing I know how to do when something's broken on a scale too big to lift alone. I made a list. Who was living in my house? Since when? Who'd put the listing up? Who was holding the money? I wrote it in block letters, the way I'd write a movement order. Tomorrow I wasn't going to argue with anyone. Tomorrow I was going to find a lawyer. Paula Renner kept an office above a bait shop in Newport, 20 minutes south, real estate and landlord-tenant law, gray bob and reading glasses on a chain. I laid the deed on her desk first. My name. Only my name. She nodded slowly, and then she gave me the bad news because good lawyers lead with the wall you're going to hit. How long have they been living there? More than a month, I told her. She took her glasses off. Then here's the part you won't like. In Oregon, once someone's been residing in a place, you can't just change the locks and put their things on the lawn. That's a self-help eviction, and it's illegal here. If you do it, you can end up owing them. I felt the floor tilt. The deed had my name on it, and it still wasn't enough to open my own front door. Paula saw my face and held up a hand. You don't kick the door. You go through the court. It's called an FED. Forcible entry and detainer. You serve proper written notice. You file in Lincoln County Circuit Court. You let a judge sign the order. It takes a few weeks. It's slower than you want. It's also bulletproof, if you do every step clean. And before you ask, no, I can't promise you they're even tenants. No lease, no rent paid to you. A couple of them closer to guests or holdovers. And Dustin running an unlicensed rental on top of it all. The law has a different door for each of those, and a judge might send them through anyone. But I'm not going to gamble on which label sticks. The Fed Road treats them as if they hold the strongest claim they could possibly make. So whichever one they turn out to be, the order still holds. We take the careful road on purpose. Then she leaned forward, and for the first time, something in her eyes sharpened. Now, you said they're renting rooms on a booking site? That's a different animal. They don't own it. They're operating a short-term rental, and out here on this coast that needs a permit and pays a lodging tax. If they've got neither, you've got more than a family fight. You've got leverage. I'd come in braced for a brawl I'd have to win with my hands. I walked out with something better. A process. They won't let me kick the door, I said in the stairwell. Good. I've always fought better by the book. I went back to the house that afternoon to try it the civilized way first. I'm not a monster. And a judge likes to see you offered an exit. I found Brenda on my porch, in my mother's chair, with Kyle's Aunt Marlene beside her, the two of them sunning like they'd earned it. I kept my voice even. Brenda, I'm only going to say this kindly once. This is my house, my parents are moving in, and your family needs to make a plan to be out. Brenda laughed at me, an actual laugh, head back. Your house, she said, bought with whose marriage? You people are nice, Serena, but you're farm people. You don't know how to make a thing like this work. We do. We made it pay. Marlene nodded along like a backup singer. Then Brenda delivered the line she'd clearly been saving, slow and satisfied. The line I'd hear in my sleep for a while. Honey, you were never really one of us. Kyle was inside. I could see his shape through the screen, not coming out. And the cruelty of it almost worked, I'll admit. The exclusion. The dismissal of everything my parents had survived. But Brenda was so pleased with herself, she got careless. And as I turned to go, she called after me, bragging, "And we're booked solid clear through the month. So booked solid through the month." She just told me free of charge that the listing was live and full. I said, "Thank you," and I meant it, and I'm fairly sure she thought she'd won. That night, I found it in 4 minutes. Harlan Cove, beachfront retreat, coastal luxury, sleeps 8. Host named Dustin, $340 a night. I scrolled the photos sitting on the motel bed with my mother asleep beside me, and my hand went cold. The cover photo was the master bedroom, the big one with the bay window and the ocean. The room I'd picked out for my parents. The room I'd imagined my mother waking up in. They'd staged it with white hotel linens and a folded throw and a little card on the pillow. Photo after photo of my house dressed up for strangers. And then near the bottom, one shot of the pool cottage out back, the little outbuilding, single room, the one you'd use for storage, with a caption underneath that read, "Owner's quarters private, please do not disturb." Owner's quarters? That's where they'd put my parents. They'd taken the bedroom with the ocean and sold it by the night. And they'd folded my 74-year-old father into a storage shed and labeled it on the internet so guests wouldn't bother the help. I screenshotted every photo. I saved the URL, the dates, the price, the calendar showing the bookings stacked up green through the month, exactly like Brenda bragged. I didn't record anyone. I didn't sneak anything. It was all sitting right there in public, advertised for the whole world to rent. $340 a night times a full calendar. I sat there doing the arithmetic, and a new question opened up that I couldn't close. All that money, weeks of it. Where exactly was it going? In the morning, my mother finally told me the whole thing, slow, over motel coffee. They'd driven up on the date we'd planned, June 3rd, the truck loaded with the few good things they owned. They'd pulled in expecting their new life. Dustin had met them in the driveway, friendly as anything, and told them there had been a little scheduling overlap, and would they mind taking the cottage just for the busy season. My parents, who have never in their lives wanted to be a bother to anyone, said, "Of course." And then the days went by, and no one ever moved them back. Brenda told my mother not to use the big kitchen because it might confuse the guests. My mother, who polished other people's tables her whole life, and finally had a table of her own coming, was told to stay out of the kitchen so paying strangers wouldn't be confused. And my father had hung those brass wind chimes on the porch hook himself for their anniversary, because the sound reminded my mother of the water. The third day, Dustin told him a guest had complained about the noise. So my father, who has never asked anyone for anything in 74 years, climbed up on a kitchen chair with his shaking hands and took the chimes down and wrapped them in a dish towel and put them away, so as not to be a bother in the house his daughter bought him. My mother told me that part, looking down at her coffee. And my father, across the little table, said, "I'm sorry, Bug. I didn't want to make trouble for you." That was the moment it stopped being grief. That's when it went cold and clean and useful. I stood up. "Nobody's making trouble for me, Dad. I make trouble. That's my job." I have to stop here for a second because this is the part where I quit feeling sorry and started taking notes. If a relative has ever moved into something you built and treated you like the guest, you know this exact cold feeling. Stay with me. There's a name on the deed and we're getting there. Subscribe so the next part finds you. The money question wouldn't leave me alone, so I pulled the thread. I cross-checked the utility bills, the ones that had climbed all spring while I was overseas, against the bookings. 20-some nights rented at $340. That's thousands of dollars a week moving through a house, and somehow Kyle had texted me twice that spring asking if I could float a little extra for the house. Float extra? While the place printed cash off my parents' bedroom. The math didn't close. Money was coming in like a tide and going out somewhere I couldn't see. I knew Kyle's spending and it wasn't lavish. He wasn't buying boats, which meant the money was filling a hole I didn't know existed. I started watching him differently. The way he flinched at the mail, the way he'd gone quiet about his contracting business all year, the jobs he used to brag about now waved off with slow season, and then, dropping my mother's prescription at the house to grab from her old room, I saw it on the hall table where the mail piled up, a windowed envelope addressed to Kyle from a bank and stamped across the front in red final notice. I don't open my husband's mail. I never have. But this one didn't ask me to. The cellophane window framed the statement's own summary line the way those final notices do. Amount past due, and beside it, a figure with a comma in it. And under that, a balance whose comma sat a place further left than the first. I read both and memorized them the way I memorize coordinates. The past due number that meant he'd already missed enough payments to trigger a red stamp, and the balance that told me this was one account, one bank, one piece of something larger, and that the whole of it was going to be worse than the window let me see. I walked out without touching it. Whatever my husband was drowning in, the lifeline he'd grabbed was my parents' house. I just didn't know yet how deep the water went. I went back the next morning for my mother's good coat, the one she'd left in the front closet, and that's when I found the thing I'll never get out of my head. The house was empty, guests checked out, the Voss crew gone to lunch, and it was almost worse quiet because I could see all of it plain. I walked through the rooms with the numbers on the doors, and on the kitchen counter, propped against the backsplash where a family would keep a recipe card, there was a laminated sheet. Thick plastic, professionally printed, the kind you make when you intend to use it for a long time. Welcome to Harlan Cove Beachfront Retreat. It's set across the top, then the Wi-Fi password, then check out by 11 a.m., then quiet hours after 10 p.m., and then, near the bottom, the line that stopped my breath. Please do not enter the pool cottage. Owner's storage. Owner's storage. My parents were the owner's storage. They had taken the time to laminate a card so strangers would be comfortable, and on that same card, they had filed my mother and father under storage. I stood in that kitchen and held the card in both hands for a long time. I'm not going to pretend I was calm in that minute. I wasn't. But I've learned what to do with a feeling that big. You don't waste it. You point it. I took out my phone and I photographed the card front and back in good light. Then I put it in my jacket pocket and my fingers found my unit's challenge coin already in there. The cold brass disc I'd carried through 2 deployments, 2 pieces of cold metal in one pocket. One of them told strangers how to feel at home in my house. The other one reminded me exactly who I was. I knew which one I was keeping. Paula and I built it like a campaign, one clean piece at a time. She drafted the notice to vacate, the proper Oregon kind, the kind a judge respects. Exact wording, exact delivery, no shortcuts a good defense lawyer could use against me later. I brought her everything, the deed, the screenshots of the listing, the booking calendar, the laminated card, which she held up and looked at for a long moment, and then set down gently. Like it was evidence in a worse kind of case, the climbing utility bills. She organized it into a folder while she talked. Here's what most people get wrong, she said. They're so angry they do something hot and stupid and they hand the other side a victory. We're not going to be hot, we're going to be patient and exact wins. Then she told me the second front. This short-term rental out here, it needs a county permit and it owes transient lodging tax. If they've got no permit, county code enforcement can issue a cease and desist and the unpaid lodging tax doesn't disappear. It attaches to whoever ran the listing. Dustin's name was on that listing. I thought about that. So I don't have to break anything, I said. No, Paula said. You file, you report, you wait, and you let 3 different offices arrive on their own schedule. I looked at the folder, all of it squared away, labeled, dated. It felt like staging gear before an operation. I didn't need to storm my own house. I needed the court, the county, and the booking platform to each knock on the same door, ideally on the same day. And I knew exactly which day that would be. Kyle came to the motel that night. He stood in the parking lot under the same buzzing light, and he looked 10 years older than the man I'd married. And he told me the truth. Finally, all of it, because he'd run out of room to hide. The contracting business had collapsed 18 months ago. He'd been carrying it on cards and a second loan hoping to dig out before I noticed. And it had only gotten deeper. And now he owed almost $60,000 he'd never told me about. He said the word humiliated 3 times. He said it killed him that his wife outranked him, out-earned him, that my money bought my parents a beachfront house while his own mother rented a 2-bedroom by the highway. And when his mother and Dustin cooked up the rental, the money felt like a rope thrown to a man going under. He'd been using it to pay down the debt. For 1 minute standing in that lot, I saw him clearly and I felt for him. A proud man drowning quietly, too ashamed to say help. That minute was real. I want you to know I gave it to him honestly. And then it ended because of what he said next. He didn't ask how my parents were. He didn't say he was sorry to Walter Joan. He said, "So can you just let it go? Leave my mom out of it. It's marital property anyway, Serena. Half of it's basically mine." There it was. He wasn't drowning anymore. He was reaching out of the water to pull my parents down with him and calling it sharing. I'd already asked Paula about exactly that line because I don't walk into rooms I haven't scouted. Title was in my name, which settled who decided the house's future right now. Not Kyle, and not his mother. The marriage was a separate question, the kind a dissolution judge sorts out, not the kind you settle in a parking lot. And in that room, I'd have my answer ready. I'd kept the purchase money in my own account the whole way, the deployment pay and the savings that ran back to before him, every dollar of it traceable to me. Basically mine wasn't how Oregon would carve up a house like this, and whatever part of it was even arguable would be argued in front of a judge, not handed to him because he asked nicely in a motel lot. I looked at the man I'd loved for 9 years. "I'm sorry about the debt," I said. "I mean that. And I filed the paperwork this afternoon." He wanted my pity to buy his silence. He got my pity. He did not get my silence. Paula's process server delivered the notices 2 days later in person to each adult living in my house. I wasn't there for it. That's how you keep it clean. But I heard how it went. Brenda took her copy, read the header, and tore it in half in the server's face. "A daughter-in-law doesn't evict her husband's mother," she announced like she was quoting a law that existed. The server, who has handed papers to far scarier people, just noted the time and left the torn halves at her feet because served is served whether you keep the paper or confetti it. Dustin laughed and said the place was booked through the month, so it didn't matter. Marlene called me a name I won't repeat. None of them moved a single suitcase. That was the part I'd braced for, and the part that mattered. They thought the notice was a threat. A bluff, an angry woman waving paper. They treated it like the opening of a negotiation where they'd hold out and I'd fold, because I'd always folded. Because for 20 years, I'd been the one who absorbed things. They had years of evidence that Serena backed down. What they didn't have was the deed, the court date, and a county tax code none of them had ever read. The notice wasn't a threat. In a campaign, you call that the first flare. You send it up so everyone can see the ground they're standing on. Then you bring up everything behind it. They just told me loudly that they were going to make me do this the hard way. Fine. The hard way has rules, and I'd read all of them, so I opened 3 fronts at once. Each one legal, each one slow, each one aimed at the same Saturday. The first, Paula filed the FED in Lincoln County Circuit Court, and the clerk gave us a hearing date and after a path to a signed order to remove anyone who still wouldn't leave. The second, I filed a complaint with county code enforcement about an unpermitted short-term rental operating in a residential zone, and I attached the public listing, the photos, the booking calendar, all of it printed and tabbed. The third, I reported the listing to the booking platform itself, a property listed by someone who is not the owner, and I sent them a copy of the deed with my name on it because their own rules don't let a non-owner rent out a place over the real owner's objection. 3 offices, 3 timelines, and here's the part I'd thought hardest about. My parents' 50th anniversary party was that Saturday, the one we'd planned for a year, the reason I'd flown home, the day the whole extended family on both sides would be standing in that yard. I could have moved it. I didn't. Not for revenge, whatever Brenda would later say. I kept the date because Saturday was the one day every person who needed to see the truth would be in the same place at the same time. The family, the neighbors, even whatever guests Dustin had booked. You don't get a room like that twice. If I was going to set this down in front of people, it would be in front of all of them, once, cleanly. I marked the date on my legal pad and underlined it. 3 days out. Brenda didn't sit still. She did the thing people like her always do when the paper starts arriving. She got loud to the relatives. She worked the phones for 2 days. The story she told was a good one. I'll give her that. Poor Brenda, evicted by her own daughter-in-law, that cold army woman who'd abandoned her husband for years overseas, and now she was back to throw his 62-year-old mother out on the street. She told my cousins. She told Kyle's side. She told the neighbors at the coast who didn't know any of us. And it worked on some of them. I got a couple of careful texts from relatives asking if I really had to be so harsh, if there wasn't a kinder way. 2 months earlier, those texts would have wrecked me. The over-responsible fixer in me would have started drafting apologies, softening, managing everyone's feelings while my parents slept in a shed. But I'd already learned the most useful thing Paula ever taught me, which is that you don't argue with a story. You let it talk itself out while the truth gets notarized. So I didn't defend myself. I didn't send paragraphs. To the relative who asked if there wasn't a kinder way, I wrote back one line: "Come Saturday, bring your own eyes." Brenda was out there narrating. Let her. Her version lived in phone calls and would die in a week. Mine lived in the county recorder's office, the court docket, and a deed with one name on it. And that version doesn't get tired and doesn't need anyone to believe it. Saturday would do the believing for me. The strangest ally arrived by accident, and Dustin handed her to me himself. A guest currently staying in my house, a school teacher from Boise named Carol, there with her husband for an anniversary of their own, got an automated message from the booking platform. It was the notice my report had triggered, the one telling guests the listing was under review for an ownership dispute. Carol, being a careful woman who'd just paid $2,000, got nervous and did some digging and found the county property record, which is public, with my name on it and Nova's anywhere near it. She figured out she was staying in a house being rented by people who didn't own it.